welcome back. Session 2 is about to start. So our next session, which is the ominously titled session, Clouds on the Horizon. But are they dark clouds or are they light, fluffy clouds? We'll soon find out. Now, if everyone's got their coffees and waters, we'll just carry on regardless. We've got about 80 minutes or so. Just also like to let everyone know we are streaming live, and we have got, I've just been told, hundreds of people watching as we speak. So to them, thanks very much for sending in their questions to the last session. Please keep them coming to this one, and we'll get through as many of them as we can. Now, about 20 years ago or so, just as we were starting TelecomTV, there really was no such thing as a hyperscaler or public cloud as we know it today. It wasn't that long ago that telcos were all building out their own cloud capabilities. Now the situation's a bit different. It's a bit more fluid. There's a lot more emphasis being placed on the public cloud and partnerships with cloud providers, which at the moment perhaps are mutually beneficial, but let's see how things develop. There's also a lot of questions still to be addressed and a healthy dose of skepticism. Well, certainly from the questions we've received so far, there's a healthy dose of skepticism. We are here debating the future of telcos, but what about the future of the hyperscalers? What about the future of the cloud providers? Where will their ambitions lead them? And what will that, or how will that impact the telcos? Everything from core to RAN and business models and service revenues. There is a lot to talk about, but of course we have another poll. I am looking at the poll on my little screen here as we speak, and look at that behind us. Here is the question we've been asking for this session. We're asking people to identify what areas that telcos absolutely need help in from the public cloud providers. And we're giving you all a choice of 7 different options there. So please just get on the poll on the website and just tick whichever ones of those you think are the most important. And we will take a look at those later in the program. Those of you in the room, if you haven't already done so, use your phones, look at that QR code on the table. That will take you straight to the website, no fuss, and it will take you straight to the poll as well, which is on the right-hand side of the page. You can also find out more about our speakers. And talking of which, we ought to introduce our speakers for this session. So I'm going to start on my far left. I'd like to welcome Martin Taylor. And Martin, the Office of the CTO at Azure for Operators at Microsoft. And next to Martin is Daryl Jordan-Smith, Senior Vice President, TME and Industries at Red Hat. And on my immediate left is Danielle Royston, founder and CEO of Telco DR. Swinging across to the right, on my immediate right we have Andrew Coward, and Andrew is GM Software Defined Networking at IBM. Next to Andrew is Ahmed Zaidi, Telco Cloud, NFV and 5G Core Architect at Orange. And on my far right, I'm delighted to welcome Amol Phadke, who is MD and GM of the Global Communication Service Provider Industry at Google Cloud. Welcome, everyone. We also have Johan Christensen, who is the founder, VP Innovation at Klura, that was City Network until recently. He was unable to join us, but he has sent some contributions to this debate, which we shall hear in due course. So to start this session off, I'd like to invite Amol to take to the lectern and deliver our DSP address. Amol, please.
So thank you, Guy. Thank you for inviting me. Just a few minutes of opening this particular panel. It is by far the most exciting panel of the day. Nothing to do with us being on the panel, but it is definitely the most exciting panel. It is also the most exciting topic. A little bit of my background. I used to be a telco provider. I used to work in a team that Neil now runs at BT. So I have fond memories of British Telecom from more than 15 years ago. And then I did a little bit of work at Alcatel-Lucent, and I was with Accenture. So I've seen things from various different perspectives. And of course, now I'm at Cloud, as Guy said, running our telecom business globally. So there are a few things that I wanted to just set the scene and give you some context on what the panel is going to talk about. Last 3 years has seen 4 things, and we have observed them at Cloud, 4 key facts. And I know we'll have a debate, so I'm going to talk about the facts plus so that we don't debate those. Then we can debate about the other things, right? Number one, internet, and for those of us who've been following internet over the last 30 years, we have seen, and Google, of course, tracks internet because a large part of our business is dependent on how successful the internet is. So we have seen somewhere in the region of 60 to 70% increase in demand of internet over the last 2 years. The reason is obvious because of the pandemic. What does that mean for a cloud provider? Fundamentally, we had to put everything, all our infrastructure, internal and external, on cloud. What I mean by that is every single Google app that you use today is now on the same cloud platform that we also use for external purposes. We had to do that because overnight, every single access to Google services had to go through a virtual or a digital mechanism, right? So what that means is internet has become flat, or in Google we say one hop. What I mean by that is every consumer or business would go to a DSP, which is featuring today on the platform and on the panel. And then from that DSP, it's going to go to a cloud provider. Whether it's a collaboration tool, whether it's a virtual meeting, whether it's entertainment, whether it's gaming, it could be anything. It will go to the cloud provider. That's a fact. That dramatically changes how we look at the economics of running this business. Certainly at cloud, we look at it as the internet is flat and we are seeing this demand, which means we have to invest significantly in the infrastructure so consumers and businesses can continue to access cloud. That's the one big fact. Did not exist in 2019, exists now. Second, digitization, and of course Google was thankfully born in a cloud native world, but digitization has ramped up exponentially in the last 3 years. We have seen businesses go bust because they could not digitize fast enough. So every business process, and I'm not just talking about Google, every business process of every company that can get digitized is getting digitized, which means cloud providers have an obligation to provide the digital platforms. Otherwise, you can't really virtualize or digitize anything. It's a second fact. Third fact, pretty much every consumer, regardless of age or any other quality, has become extremely savvy. Let me start with my daughter, who's 10 years old. Her entire schooling in the last 3 years, as you would have seen yourselves, is virtual and digital. I had a very different school experience 30 years ago when I was in school. There was no digital, there was no computer. So you can imagine how savvy a 10-year-old is in using the digital tools, which means there's tremendous choice and very little patience as far as consumers and businesses are concerned. As soon as they find a better option, they're going to switch, and it won't be just on price. It will be on a whole host of things. So that's fact 3. And then the last one, which I think is very important for all of us, is we are also seeing tremendous investments being done across the board. And when I talk about the industry ecosystem, operators, cloud providers, network providers, infrastructure providers, app manufacturers, software providers, all of these are investing heavily. I don't think the balance of investments is yet optimized, which means there is a lot of investments being done by a fewer number of constituents in the ecosystem. Ultimately, if we don't collaborate, we will destroy value. What I mean by that is we will be spending too much in very specific places, and then we'll just get bottlenecks in other places. Let me give you an example. I heard earlier today about fiber becoming very prevalent now, 5G becoming very prevalent now. The bottleneck at this stage is actually supply chain, and nobody's actually paying attention to that. And so pretty much even cloud providers like us are struggling to meet the demand. Of course, we can invest in building data centers, we can invest in building cloud platforms on top and the software layer. But there are problems, real problems that the industry faces around macroeconomics, supply chain, and so on, that we have not solved. And that's why we believe cloud can help solve those challenges because of our scale. And that scale helps us solve some of the issues that we see around supply chain and other things. So overall, I think it's a sobering moment for us as an industry. And that's why I'm really looking forward to the panel to see how we can solve this together. But that's all I had to say, Guy. Over to you.
Great. Thanks so much indeed. fascinating points there, and I'm sure we're going to be developing those as the conversation progresses. As you say, there's a lot of macroeconomic factors at work at the moment. How much of that we can influence, I'd be fascinated to hear more about. But just before we start, does anybody in our audience want to pick up on anything that Amol's just said in that address? Any questions that suddenly come to light? Because we want to involve all of you. So if there's any immediate questions, then please pop your hands in the air and we'll come to you. If not, we shall ask our panelists. Anyone on our panel picking up on what Amol said, some of the key points he mentioned there. One in particular that really got me, this collaboration to optimize investments. Collaboration, there's a whole industry to do that. Danielle.
Well, I think one thing that I really liked that Amol said was how consumers have really changed in the last pandemic in terms of their expectation of experience from their vendors. I recently saw a paper from McKinsey that was, it was like 70+% of consumers are demanding personalization in their brands. They'll recommend it to other people. They'll use it if that's what you provide. And I think that's a really great opportunity with the scale of data that we are dealing with in telco. Again, this is the public cloud debate and panel, and I'm the public cloud girl, so I'm going to be crazy on the public cloud. But with the amount of data that's being generated by the networks, by the applications, by everything out there, you almost have to use hyperscalers, right, to deal with the data, so that you can process it, you use machine learning, you use AI, so you can provide that personalized experience. And I haven't really seen personalization in telco, certainly my own personal experience with my provider in terms of understanding how I use a network, even though I'm on the highest plan, probably one of the highest ARPU customers out there. I think there's a lot of ways to tailor the experience to me versus you. We might be in the same demographic-ish, right? Unlimited plans, but we use it in a different way because we're just unique people. And I think the cloud with telco is bringing that experience and it's making that possible. So I'm obviously very bullish and excited about that. And so totally agree with what Amol was saying on that point.
Thanks, Danielle. Any other immediate comments from what we just heard?
I think I'd like to comment on the supply chain because I totally agree with that. I think we're overlooking the fact that there is a supply chain issue. A lot of our clients around the world today can't get hold of the compute and or processing that they need or even the storage that they need. So they are moving dramatically into the cloud and we're really keen to support that move. And what we're also seeing is they're so keen to do it, they're choosing all the different hyperscalers. So they'll have Microsoft, they'll have Google, they'll have AWS, and they'll have IBM and others in the mix. I have to say that because we're owned by IBM. And it's really important that we understand that the nature of the cloud itself in terms of meeting that demand is hybrid. And that's really what we're trying to focus on. How do we make sure that the applications are highly available and secure across multiple cloud environments to help our customers get to that end state where they need to be?
Thanks, Daryl. Any comments from our opening? Otherwise, we'll move on to our first talking point of our session. Okay, because I really want to focus in on a few key areas. And I think top of the agenda for a lot of people is always cost. And there's the perception or belief that public cloud is just too expensive. There's charges everywhere you look. Maybe not charges to get on, but certainly charges to get off. Costs can escalate as usage increases. Telcos are already trying to support near commoditized services, for example. So, we're talking very low revenues per bit for traditional telco services. So, do the economics of public cloud work? Ahmed, perhaps I could look from our traditional operator. Orange, huge legacy, huge experience, a lot of geographic sectors you operate in. For you, public cloud, do the economics of public cloud work out?
Yes. For me, let's say public cloud and also the telco cloud should work. And also what we're doing also in our side at Orange is we're trying to put every technology on the same line. That means telco cloud, public cloud, and also vertically that what historical telco vendors are providing to us. And in the same line to see what is the better solution, where we go, where we want to go, and also as you know, we can have several challenges that we are facing also in different technologies, let's say, and to make it all of this in the balance to see what is the benefit and if which solution, let's say, we can move forward.
Great. Thanks, Ahmed. Any other thoughts about the economics of cloud, Andrew?
I was going to say, I think there's an agility point, right? So, I mean, cost aside, just the speed of which you can develop, the speed at which you can release, and all the things that you don't have to do if you do it yourself, you don't have to if you go in the cloud, are absolutely present there. So I think a lot of the decisions, and I can speak from IBM from a development perspective, when we develop things in the cloud, they happen so much faster. And so I think there's almost this little catch, right? You get all that acceleration early on, and then the bill comes due, once you've got it at scale, and that becomes the point of, are you stuck at that point? What choices do you have? I think there's also this kind of interesting thing between the clouds. I think to the point Darryl was making, I think 5-6 years ago, you'll forgive me, Amol, for this point, everybody thought that Amazon was going to win everything. And they didn't. And so, it's interesting when we talk to customers, it's not just one cloud or two clouds. Nobody thinks that 3 clouds is enough. They just keep going.
Yeah.
And it's all for different purposes. And then you add the SaaS picture in the mix, and you end up with 6 or 7. And the interesting thing to your point about exporting data, so now you've got the issue of saying, I need to move stuff from AWS to Google to Azure, because everything's spread out. And then the costs start multiplying really carefully. So there's quite a bit of planning that's needed up front.
I think one thing to add to what Andrew is saying is, the question when we say public cloud economics, it's actually hybrid cloud. In this context, it's actually hybrid cloud because a lot of workloads are still going to sit on-prem for various reasons, security, privacy, sovereignty. There's never going to be a state, at least from our perspective, where 100% of everything that an operator has will move to cloud, which automatically means you can't really look at the economics as we've traditionally looked at economics as a TCO thing. Hey, total cost of ownership is this much. Well, actually, we are not owning anything now because the cloud model kind of breaks the ownership model because we are saying, no, you're leasing some capacity regardless of which cloud provider you use. So you almost have to look at it as to Andrew's point, what's the total cost of delivering those services to the end consumers? Right? And you have to look at that baseline and then compare it with what you had before. Because TCO, we have found, of course, on pure CapEx to OpEx, you can't really compare, and then you sort of start to go into the CFO conversation. But in reality, you need to look at, okay, if I am having so many people and so many systems and so many applications serving this set of consumers, what would I benefit from moving to a hybrid cloud scenario? That's what we've seen pan out in most of the deployments we are doing.
Great insights. Thanks very much for that. Any other comments about the economics of cloud, Darryl?
I just think that it's, as you were saying, Andrew, time to value is key. And that's a very difficult calculation. So you've got to look at what the applications you have today and which ones make sense to get into the cloud. And then you've got to look at the developer experience because the developers are the ones that are actually going to drive an awful lot more content to the cloud, whether they're applications or actually physical content itself. So getting those experiences right and the economics right for the developer is also going to be very, very key.
Yeah.
Yeah, just one thing. A lot of people think about moving to the cloud and, today with the state of telco applications and software, it is not optimized for the public cloud at all. A lot of stuff needs to be rewritten and refactored. Databases need to be ripped out and replaced with more efficient. We're using Oracle database, very expensive Oracle databases for storage on the ground today. And in the cloud, there is cold storage and cool storage and hot storage. And so there's this whole middle of you move something into the cloud and it is a live beast that you have to manage. That cost is something you got to think about every day. That's something you don't think about today in your telco data centers, right? You kind of make the business case, you buy all the hardware, and for 5 years, it's a largely static cost. With public cloud, it's changing every day. I mean, Google or AWS, whatever, Azure changes their price, right? And it's usually lower, but your workloads aren't running on the cheaper machines. Is your team agile enough to take advantage of a cheaper chip or a new database? Can you move data around? And so this is a whole new world that telco I mean, we are early days on this. And so I think absolutely you can save cost. I think you need to build teams that know how to use the cloud, and it's very dynamic, and you should be saving 80% of your TCO. If you're not, there's something wrong. And you should be setting a goal to reduce, and the cloud guys are gonna hate this. I mean, I set a goal of reducing my cloud spend by 50% every year. 50%. And you should have that opportunity. But then with those savings, what do you do with it? Do you reinvest it? Do you put it in your pocket? And what do you do? And so it's hard, it's not easy, but it's super exciting.
We as telcos, who probably aren't super excited all the time, but we ought to be more super excited if we're going to be DSPs. We over-provision our networks. We're used to over-provision our networks. We do spend a lot. Martin, are we overstating the case of the importance of cost when it comes to the cloud economics for telcos? Are we making too much of a deal of it?
So, look, the economies of scale are extraordinarily powerful. So, I mean, there's absolutely no question that a hyperscaler can operate a compute platform at a much lower cost than a telco can. So, and a hyperscale cloud like Azure wouldn't be growing at like 47% year on year, already a huge enterprise as it is, without the economic case for moving workloads to the cloud being completely obvious. But it isn't just about economics. You know, it is also about the ability to move more quickly. So, you know, we always say our mission is, you know, first of all, to help operators build and operate networks more efficiently and more effectively than they currently can, you know, with their existing private cloud arrangements. But secondly, to help them innovate and create new revenue streams, you know, which is primarily at the moment all about leveraging 5G and the power of edge and all that. So, you know, there's a cost side of the equation, and there's also the incremental revenue stream side of the equation. And I think, you know, put those two together, there's a very, very powerful argument for telcos to look very carefully at how they can best leverage hyperscale cloud. And it might not be the obvious things. You know, there's so much focus on 5G. Everybody wants to talk about 5G all the time. Well, do you want to move 5G to hyperscale cloud? Maybe sometime in the future, but maybe it's not the first candidate. And it's less obvious services. I mean, we're seeing a lot of traction with voicemail. I mean, no one talks about voicemail anymore, for good reason. No one gives a damn about voicemail. But they have to have it, they have to operate it. It may be running on out-of-date legacy equipment, end of life. Got to do something with it. Okay, you know, maybe that's a good workload to move into the public cloud.
Good point. Thanks, Martin. Now, we asked Johan this question from Klura, and last week we spoke to him, and we asked him about the issue of cost, and is cloud too expensive? And we've got a little clip now of Johan and his very clear answer. So if we could play that clip of Johan, please.
I think actually Ginny, the former CEO of IBM, when she bought Red Hat, she said it well. She said, you know, public cloud and the new way of working, so to speak, is 3 times as expensive, but it's 10 times faster. And it's that speed that we all need to attain. If we don't, we're gonna, you know, fall behind when it comes to any type of innovation and any type of service, because again, digital is of course at the core, whether it's your processes or actually the customer meeting itself. So I think it's less about cost. There's going to be instances when that's at play, of course, and we're going to find, you know, certain workloads, certain things where let's do it a different way. But overall, I think that it's dangerous to think of this as a cost issue, so to speak, because it's not really what the main point of this is.
Well, you know, as Johan says, as far as he's concerned, cost isn't the main issue here. It's very clear about that. But so before we move off the cost issue, any thoughts about cost from our audience here? Yes, we have a hand in the air. The microphone is on its way.
That's a cue. All right, interesting. Ian Ginn from IFG Consulting Europe. It reminds me of a conversation I was having with the strategic manager of one of the largest European telcos a few months ago, and his experience of working with the cloud providers. They'd spent quite considerable time working with cloud providers to agree a deal. 2 years down the road, product had been changed 20 times by the cloud provider and pricing 60 times. no way of could he reconcile the contract 2 years ago and where he was now, a bit like Daniel was saying. So telco, of course, tends to have long-term contracts, and the cloud seems to be very nimble, but also difficult to price really in the long term. So how do you deal with that?
Oh, good question. Thanks very much. Anyone on the panel want to sort of take a stab at an answer? Amol.
Okay.
Fantastic question. If we leave the CapEx side of this to one side for a second, I think the point here is very valid, which is for us to get the benefit of cloud deployments, the operations has to be tuned to a cloud-like operation. What I mean by that is, I will go back to what Martin said. The reason clouds are growing is because of the economies of scale, but also how they operate that cloud in a very lean sort of fashion. At Google, we do the sort of SRE type operations. That has to come across and also become a DSP mode of operation. Because if that happens, then some of the costs that was mentioned will start to go down, because you are still looking at a lot of operational cost for something that's actually on cloud and does not need that level of operational cost. I mean, that's certainly one way to deal with the why is cloud changing so quickly, because our scale is non-linear, and so as our scale grows, we will keep, the definition of agile would be we're going to keep bringing out new releases, which will not require an increase in operational cost. But that has to translate into the operator domain by having the same lean operations. Because if you don't have lean operations, you will still inherit all the current cost and add the cloud cost on top. And that's, I think, where the issue is.
Thanks, Amol.
And we deal with this from a Red Hat perspective every day. It's a very good observation and question. And my friend from Google will say that Kubernetes, because we both work on that project, 98% of the code of Kubernetes will change in 2 years' time. The whole base code will change. It changes at a cadence of every 3 months. So it's a very rapid change associated with deploying cloud-based infrastructure in a container-based platform. The key, however, is, in the way that we're looking at it, is you need to lock on a particular version and lock that for a sustainable period of time, and work the ecosystem of partners into that particular system and give them a predictable way forward so they can actually migrate the life cycle of all the other cloud native functions that will also work in that particular environment. So going to what you were saying there very specifically, you need to translate what we understand very well in enterprise into a telco-based domain, and the way that telcos need to deliver provision and provide services in a carrier manner against the KPIs that you guys need to deliver against, because you're a regulated industry as well.
But isn't that giving up the exact reason of moving to the public cloud, which is the speed, right? Like, I think, I get it, carriers need to, they're used to having very controlled environments on versions. But I think, let's go to the other side, which is one of the biggest problems with telcos competing today is their lack of speed, right? Their lack of, it's not so much lack of innovation, it's just the speed of getting things to market. And so if you guys, telcos, could embrace speed and operating much more like some of the internet or techco companies, they live with the change of Kubernetes. Their applications are resilient enough that they self-heal, they can recover from these things. And so we have a long way to go, because that's not how we operate today. But if we could get closer to that, I think it will speed up the innovation. And we can come out with new ideas and selling our connectivity much more easily to enterprises. Instead of trying to take our environments and move them to the cloud and make it work. I think like cloud providers and, did something fall?
It might.
Did it fall?
No, it's just on
my
your
hair.
Yeah, it's your hair.
They told me about my hair. Sorry. No one has that problem, but me. But yeah, so I think embracing more cloud-like thinking, right, so that you can move at that speed rather than trying to lock things down, right? Yeah. Don't try to make the cloud like your data centers. Make your data centers work with the cloud.
Who was it who said, move fast and break things? Was that a Zuckerberg thing, maybe? I mean, that's a terrifying phrase to telcos. Yeah, they want to move fast, but they absolutely don't want to break anything. So, I mean, this is definitely one of the challenges that hyperscalers have to address. I mean, it's true that the infrastructure underneath the applications is constantly being refreshed, and it's critical that doesn't break anything. So, we have to figure out how to deal with that. And it's partly a case of vendors understanding that they've got to build the applications in a way that isn't impacted by changes in the underlying stack. But it's also incumbent on hyperscalers to make sure that they've got the canary testing and the monitoring and all that kind of stuff in place, so that when they roll out upgrades, it doesn't break telco workloads. And that's one of the ways in which I think the hyperscalers will have to adapt to the needs of these kinds of workloads. But it is something that we are working on.
Yeah.
Great. Well, that question generated a great discussion on the stage. Were there any other questions? Oh yes, I've got a hand at the back. Looks like it's Neil.
Everyone, great to be here, and what a phenomenal job you guys have done in this whole venue. Just before I ask my question, so the public cloud is so expensive. I mean, I can't believe anybody thinks that isn't an issue. And not only do I have to do it once, I have to do it 3 times. I have to get my staff trained 3 times with different solutions. I have to build 3 landing solutions, and then this is a stat that will blow your mind. Our PSTN at BT had more uptime than the public cloud. It's a 50-year-old platform. How can that be true? So I encourage everyone, my competitors, to listen to Daniel move. I want you to move as much as you can to the public cloud. Please, we'll give you the connectivity, we'll help you do it. Move all your stuff to the public cloud, and the sooner you do it, the happier my customers are going to be. The second point, you kind of talk about the public cloud like, it's a kind of a done and dusted thing. This year, BT is 176 years old, and the public cloud's about 5. And I think that if we'd thought that way, and we probably did 176 years ago, well, you'll never need another BT, or you'll never need another AT&T, or you'll never need another Telus, or whoever the kind of incumbent telcos are. Look at the world now. There are thousands of telcos. And I believe that's going to happen to the cloud, that we're going to have all sorts of different types of solutions that aren't just by the 3 or 4 big guys. And I point to kind of Oracle in this space, who came from nowhere and are now actually doing a phenomenal job of their cloud. And if you haven't looked at Oracle Cloud, I really encourage you to do it, because some of their high performance stuff is out of this world. And I just think we need to, we really need to understand is more about the benefits, more about the cost, but also public cloud guys. I'd love to move stuff to you, but make it easier for me. So Danielle, your point about moving from one CPU to another, my God, it feels like the 70s and I'm doing arbitrage on voice minutes. Why? I mean, we moved away from that sort of crazy world. Why would we reinvent it? So my challenge is, make it easier. Actually, you talk about economies of scale, you talk about all the great things. We're not seeing it. And until we do, and until we see the reliability, we're not going to move at the pace you want us to do. And then finally, I think there's a belief that there's this like gold at the end of the telco workloads, that all of a sudden, if I'm in one of these hyperscalers and I win BT or Deutsche Telekom or Orange, that there's this huge amount of revenue coming with it. There just isn't. Look at our economics. It doesn't exist. So. Please help us to see this value, because right now we're not seeing it, and our customers. You talk about break things, just the notion of us breaking something, just shows how far away and how little you understand our business, and I find that particularly frustrating as someone who's been building networks for 30 years. It almost feels like, hey, you guys know nothing about what you're talking about. We're the experts, come and do what we're doing. I just don't buy it, and I think you need to rethink your strategy, otherwise it won't be the big 4 players that get this business, it'll be everyone else. And that's more of a statement than a question, really.
Neil, we'll happily take your statements any day of the week. It doesn't have to be a question. Thanks very much, as always, for your honest observations there. Any initial reactions
I'll say one thing since I got called out there. But, I'm going to have Neil on the podcast. I'm going to interview him on Wednesday, and hopefully we can deep dive a little bit more into this. But maybe it's time to talk about, what kinds of workloads are we talking about, right? And so I'm a charging girl. I'm a BSS girl. That kind of puts me a little bit more on the IT side. I think everyone's, sort of agrees a little bit easier to move those workloads to the public cloud network, right? Again, I'm not a network expert. And so maybe on the network side, you have to be a little bit more careful about the workloads that you're moving towards. But I did interview Amol Phadke for my podcast, and that episode's coming out in a couple of weeks. But we were talking about the Vodafone project that Google's doing. And I think that there is value there, right? I mean, Vodafone, I think in 2018 at Google Cloud Next in London, announced a project to move all of their analytical workloads up until Google. They closed down 600 Hadoop servers. They had pockets of analytics going across their 11 plus opcos, right? So they started to drive standardization. When you talk to people on that project, and Amol doesn't know this, but I know because I've talked to some Vodafone people, they're like, that project was freaking hard. It was hard, but we wish we started earlier, and it was totally worth it. And they're starting to detect network anomalies and get insights on their customers, and they're driving it into systems of action. And I think that's real value. So we've seen both cost reductions, they've seen standardization across, I mean, they're in Africa, they're in Europe, and Google's been a great partner for them. I'm sure Amol can talk more about it, but I think there is real value. But again, I'm coming from the IT side, and so maybe that's where my business case is, and Neil, as head of network, kind of sees the world through different lenses. I get that, but I think there are great business cases out there. Maybe network it's a little bit harder to make.
Excellent. Any more comments for
Martin? The elephant in the room, and Neil raised it, is availability, right? Everybody knows that hyperscale clouds suffer from outages from time to time, and to a degree that would be completely unacceptable for many telco services. We all understand that, right? The fact is that, first of all, as Neil says, hyperscale cloud has only been around for a few years, so it's still got quite a lot of maturing to do. But also, up till now, it's been built for a specific purpose, which is to help enterprises move workloads from their own private compute facilities to somewhere where they can be operated more cost effectively and with the ability to scale more quickly and so on. Carrier grade availability has not been a fundamental requirement. So, these clouds have been engineered to be fit for the purpose for which they are mostly being used right now. But to say that, you guys don't understand telcos, we understand perfectly well. This is why Microsoft acquired Metaswitch and Affirm, right? We've got 1,800 engineers who have spent many, many years in the telco industry delivering network functions that are 5 or 6 nines available. So we get it. Work needs to be done, but it's not rocket science. At the end of the day, high availability engineering, is an understood science, and it can be applied to hyperscale clouds, and that is happening right now.
Great, Martin. Thanks very much, and Danielle for comments to Neil's remarks there. Unless there's any more, we'll move on, and I'll guarantee we'll have a discussion at lunchtime about that particular topic. We're all here for a day and a half, hopefully. Right, we've got to move on. Mind you, the other takeaway I've got from that is we've got another 176 years of the PSTN to look forward to. So that's terrific news. Fantastic. Put that in the story, Ray. Moving on. Right. What about the line that one shouldn't cross? Is there a line where we shouldn't cross? Telcos shouldn't cross. Is there a point in a telco public cloud partnership where things stop being helpful and valuable and the risk to businesses and marketers simply becomes too high? In other words, how far should we go in these partnerships that we are talking about? Ahmed, perhaps a little bit unfair, but as the operator on the panel here, do you see these partnerships as kind of open-ended? They'll just go wherever they take you, or do you have a hard stop and saying, we're happy to talk about this, but we're not going to go in this area?
So, great question. At least what you were doing and what we need to work closely with public cloud, and let's say to have some collaborative win-win approach between public cloud and CSPs. The goal there is, if you are winning, that means all of us who are winning and we are succeeding to have a success story. If not, so we're trying to manage all of these challenges. But from today, what we can say is there is only, let's say, as you know, specific for each country, is that there is some data that, okay, you are not able, let's say, to forward it in something on the cloud, and that's what the CSP are focusing more how to keep secure this data related only on the UEs and information on all the subscribers, for example. At the end of the day, let's say we have the same goal. Let's say we need to work. There is public cloud, as I said. There is hyperscaler also. There is vertical telco, historical telco vendor. That's what we are proposing. We need to see which of those solutions are the best for everyone and try to move forward and, let's say, to write a success story.
Go see what's happening first. Thank you very much for those points. Any more points from my colleagues on my right-hand side? We'll switch across to the left. Well, Andrew.
I was going to say, to actually go back to the point was made earlier, I do feel like there's this false dichotomy that's being presented to telcos, which is, and by the way, Martin, I appreciate your answer earlier, because I think a lot of the public messages is basically bring everything to the cloud. And that's a story that's repeated time and time again. It's like you have a choice as a telco, this false dichotomy, either do everything yourself or put it in the cloud. And obviously, there's a huge middle ground, as I think we're debating here. And so I think there's a great deal of frustration. I actually find it quite patronizing when you hear this message. Why don't you just move everything into the cloud? We've got it all. We've done it all. Everything's packaged here, and we'll take it from here. And I think one of the real pains of even attempting that today, or even in 3-4 years' time, is the fact that every telco today looks like a snowflake. Every telco is unique in how they're deploying service, in the choice of vendors they've made. And to take that and basically place it in cloud is an incredibly difficult thing to do, because the cloud providers, you don't want to have how many telcos do we say there were? 1,000 global different solutions and sets. It's got to be repeatable. And so one of the questions around this boundary point is, do the telcos, so the cloud providers end up saying, we've got this package of services, it does all these things, it gives you the reliability now, but you don't have a choice. You have to go and do it this way, our way, or no way. And to give you an analogy, if you think about how, it sounds strange, but bear with me, Salesforce came on the market with CRM. And when Salesforce came along, they said, we don't care what your sales methodology is. We don't care how you do things. We've got the right way of doing it. And if you follow our methodology, you'll have sales success and you'll have a whole CRM system that works that way. So I kind of feel that we're going to have to go through that transformation in telco for the cloud providers to actually succeed in offering consistent services that everybody adapts to.
I think Ahmed touched upon another great point, which is, I think no matter which way we go with this transformation, this notion of trust is always going to sit with the operator. When they serve their customers or businesses, cloud providers, for a whole host of reasons, are never going to be a trusted entity facing the customers. So there is that acceptance that we should have as an industry, that ultimately the operators are considered as a trusted relationship. I mean, if you go to buy a house or open a bank account in UK, you can take your phone bill. You can't take your, Gmail account bill, for instance. That will not be used as an acceptable form of identity or address. So the trust relationship that operators have is a very important line that I don't think will get crossed, and they would end up owning the customer. Now, what does that mean? That also means operators, when they work with cloud providers, to what Andrew said, have to figure out the best way of achieving that balance. There is going to be the customer-facing infrastructure, the customer ownership and trust that is always going to sit with the operator. And cloud providers generally don't like this fact, but in this case, they are going to be a back office supporting system, enabling the operators to do things much better. And I believe that maturity of thought has not yet happened across all the industry.
Right. That's interesting. And I kind of like that. There's almost this expectation of a monoculture from a cloud perspective as well, meaning a telco will say, oh, this telco is a Google account, or this telco is an Amazon account. And I don't see that happening, frankly. And so the interesting part that's going to flow is that, let's just say that Azure wins, for the sake of argument, for 5G, for 5G core. And then Google wins for some other aspect of it, and IBM wins for some other piece of it, right? Now you've got the issue of traffic moving between the clouds that's totally outside of the scope or visibility of the telco to see. When traffic moves between AWS and Azure and Google and IBM, who knows where it goes, right? You're back to the reliability question. So there's some really interesting dynamics that play out when cloud-to-cloud services exist, which we haven't even started to think about yet as an industry and how that's going to play out.
Excellent. Great observations, especially around about the boundaries here. Thanks so much for those. Any more thoughts about those boundaries? Otherwise, I'd like to hear what Johan has to say, because we asked the same question to Johan earlier. So if we could play Johan's clip now, please.
I think telcos in general over the last 20 years have been trying to find those services that truly bring value in a different sense than just being the pipe, so to speak, and had the challenge there. And I think that the hyperscalers will prove to be a difficult balancing act, in the sense of let's work together, but also not give away the store. So I do think that the telcos should be very careful in how they do those strategic alliances and partnerships. It's a must, it's a necessity, but do watch out, because I do believe that any business that they want, they will continue to eat in, and that also goes for the telcos.
A must, but a cautious must from Johan there. We do have a question that's just come in from our online audience that relates or is linked to this talking point. So let me just read this out for our guests now. The question is, should hyperscaler public cloud adoption be a short-term strategy or a long-term strategy for CSPs, especially in lieu of direct competition from hyperscalers for core connectivity businesses? So, length of partnerships perhaps. So we should be looking at the short term, should be looking at the long term.
Well, my view is you've got to look at it in the long term. And the reason for that is that what we've been discussing, you're going to have some applications or workloads that will naturally fit into the cloud and be more easily absorbed into the cloud. There are going to be core functions that you're probably not going to want to put into the cloud because of regulatory reasons and other security-based reasons. And as a consequence of that, you're going to need to make a longer-term decision. In addition to that, the hyperscalers are also very good partners to the operators, and they will help the operators deploy services to enterprises and be great partners in those arrangements. So one needs to be careful in terms of obviously how you might get disintermediated from that, but you need to work a long-term strategy and partnership with the hyperscalers to facilitate that. So from my perspective, long-term.
Yeah, I actually think it's quite difficult for operators to make long-term plans like that, because hyperscale cloud continues to evolve. And if you take a snapshot today, as Neil has done, you might say, there's no way I can move voice into hyperscale cloud because it doesn't offer me 5 nines, right? Well, in 2 years' time, when we can demonstrate that we can meet that, then it's a whole different ballgame. So I mean, my view is simply that, think about the way that telcos procure stuff. It goes in cycles, right? So, there's 5G, there's 6G, that's one sort of cycle. There's just equipment obsolescence cycles. And when some particular set of equipment or set of software that's supporting a particular service needs to be replaced, then you make a decision about how you're going to deal with it. Am I going to build it in-house? Am I going to run it on my own private cloud? Am I going to consume it as a service from a hyperscaler? There'll be all sorts of choices. And I think, what hyperscale will do over the next decade or so is increase the range of choices, all the way up to and including complete services as a service. So, I'm predicting direction of travel here, voicemail as a service, fixed line digital voice as a service coming from hyperscalers. So from a telco standpoint, they've got the luxury of build it themselves, all the way up to consume it as a service. That's a great thing. And trying to make long-term plans now when you don't really know how things are going to pan out, I think is hard.
Right, but don't you think, I think for the short term to long term though, these services are incredibly sticky, right? For the startup I ran before I joined IBM, if I said to my developers, you know what, I don't like AWS's pricing right now. We're going to move to Azure, right? I'd have had a rebellion on my hands, right? There's no way that that would have been possible. And so your short-term decision becomes long-term by the nature of just how sticky these services are. And so it only becomes a point where you get a technology shift. So to your point, you're moving from legacy to new, or from whatever cloud X to cloud Y becomes later. You would have that transition point. And so I think we're finding a lot of telcos will simply sleepwalk their way into a long-term relationship with these cloud providers because their developers and the technology that they build or they want to partner with is going to lead them in that direction.
Going to happen organically. Yeah, Danielle.
I'll use my Lady Gaga microphone. but I think, people who are asking, is it a short-term decision, are looking at the cloud providers like a data center, like just dumb compute and dumb storage. And so you look at some of the bigger players in telco that have moved to the public cloud. These have been 5-year journeys at least. I think Francesca said that they started doing stuff in 2016. I mean, that was 5 years ago. I know Verizon's started in 2016. Vodafone's been talking about this since 2017. I mean, these are, short term. I don't think 5 years is short term, right? And so, the second point I want to make in terms of deciding to use the public cloud, this is the platform change. You're changing databases. You're changing the chipset probably that you're running on. You're changing the way that application runs. And ideally, when I think of cloud native, I think of native to that cloud. You're using AWS databases. You're using Azure services. You're using Google's AI that you can't re-platform and repatriate back to your data center. So this is a big, it's a platform change, and it's got to be long-term. If you're gonna do it right, it's a long-term decision.
Thanks, Danielle. We've just got another, Ahmed,
yes,
please.
so just coming back to this long-term and short-term, from my perspective, so there is no, let's say, short-term or long-term. It's at least we need to check what is the specific use cases that you want to deploy, for example, or to put in one premises, for example. And if you are using public cloud, for example, in this use case, maybe this use case, this solution are not adaptable, and we need to move to maybe Telco Cloud. So for me, we will have, let's say, as operator, we will have several use cases, specific use cases, and on each of those use cases, we need to choose and to adapt one solution on the other. And maybe at the end of the day, we will have, let's say, several solutions that we can provide to our customers.
Brilliant, and that would lead very nicely into our next talking point about the Telco Cloud. However, I do want to get a question in now. Throw it in to the mix, because we've just got this one in from our audience seconds ago, based on what you're all saying there, and it's a really short one, and it's quite controversial, so here it goes. Is public cloud the new lock-in threat for telcos? That's generated a response. Right, this is it. We have had a lifetime of lock-in, and looks like we're going to get some more from the public cloud friends. Is that the case? Any thoughts from anybody on that?
I'll go first on that.
Oh, go on.
I've been talking a lot, so I feel like I'm hogging the panel. But I'm I don't understand this big fear on vendor lock-in. You're locked into NetworkKit with three vendors in the world. You're locked into your database vendor. And all of a sudden, we're I don't want vendor lock-in on my cloud provider. I don't really get the big fear. You have it today. You live with it now. Otherwise, go build frickin' everything from scratch. And you gotta pick on what you're focusing on, right? I hear about how our ARPU is, failing, going down. OTT people are taking it away. Focus on your business, which is connectivity. It's not owning the whole stack. Let the cloud providers do this commodity hardware data center management for you. Let them provide services that you get to use. Finally, you get to go OTT on Google Cloud and Azure and AWS's investment. This is a huge opportunity. A megatrend like this, how often did something like this come around? And you get to use it? Have you ever seen another vendor, another industry spend as much on CapEx? They spend more than telcos. For once. Use it. Don't be afraid of it.
Don't be afraid of any potential lock-in, is what you're saying. Right. Right.
Danielle,
So, hold that thought.
Danielle, you just proved my point. I said earlier, the false dichotomy. You said, build it yourself or take it to the cloud, right? I mean, that is a false dichotomy because you've got to be able to pick and choose the elements that you need, right? Now, yes, some stuff will go in the cloud. Yes, some stuff will be private data center some stuff you will build yourself, right? So we're missing the role of systems integrators and solution builders and so on. As an industry, we're just going through this whole Open RAN initiative. For what purpose? To disaggregate all the vendors so we can make choices at each point. And so I think what's going to happen is that the fear of lock-in will say, I don't want this vertical stack that I've been building for the last 30 years. I want to take picks from here and here. And that's why we'll end up with 5 different or more different cloud providers providing these different elements of it. Now, the question becomes, if you choose one of those things, can you make a change in 5 years' time, or are you kind of locked into that? And that's a really interesting to be determined question.
Yeah, I think, first I want to go back to what Neil said before, right? In the sense, given it's only been 4 or 5 years of the cloud journey, there are other clouds players that are coming to the market. Neil mentioned Oracle. There's a bunch of others that are going to come in. So when you say lock-in, generally it's 2 or 3. I think it's going to become 5 or 6 or 7 over time in any case. The second thing which is really important here is we have to sort of play out, if you did not want to do a lock-in, what would that mean? So let's say you did best of breed as a strategy and chose different solutions, and therefore, the barrier to entry was less and you got more choice coming in. Fast forward, you get M&A and acquisitions.
Yep.
And what will end up happening is the bigger players will just end up buying the smaller players, has happened in every industry that we know of. And you're back to 3 or 4 players. Who goes to retail and who then says, I want 200 different brands to shop every day, please? We don't. I don't. I'll be crazy to shop 200 retail brands, right? So we will sort of go through this cycle. We will be spoiled for choice. Then we'll be consolidating. And we'll say, actually, 3 to 4 is better because that sort of gives you the choice, but it's a right mix. And at that point, it won't be lock-in. It will be like, oh, this is a right-sized ecosystem.
The market will grow.
So I think that's how it's going to play out. And that's how, I'm certainly thinking of how it's going to play out.
It's cyclical. You go in cycles here.
Well, don't forget, telcos have a habit of merging together as well, right?
Oh.
And so, so you're going to end up with multiple vendors just as a consequence of that, right?
Any other thoughts about lock-in, Daryl?
When you start to build for the middle, right, to be able to move to go back on premise or to another cloud, it forces you into the lowest common denominator of technology choices, right? I need to pick. It's not the best tech. And some of these decisions are really important. Database matters in charging. It really does. You can't just pick some vendor neutral thing that I can move to any cloud. And so I think that's a really dangerous decision for telcos to make, is I'm going to build it in a cloud agnostic way so I can move it back easily. I think you end up making bad technical decisions.
Daryl.
I was just going to say that this is why you need to have a longer term strategy in terms of what you're trying to do, number one. Number two, I think the point that you were making is very true. Through consolidation, acquisition, the cloud is going to be very hybrid in its nature. You're going to need to be flexible in terms of how you build your strategy and your engagement, both from running your business perspective, but also your partners outside, where you're projecting outside as well.
See, we don't just throw these questions together. They're all linked. This whole conversation is
yeah,
one.
And then back to Andrew, I don't think it's necessarily all or nothing. I think you will have workloads on premise and in a hybrid situation. But knowing the typical telco culture, they're going to be risk averse and a little bit stop short. And so I'm always going to say, keep going. Like, move as much as you can. And sometimes those workloads don't make sense. Don't move it. But move as much as you can.
Well, let's ask our in-person audience if they've got any thoughts about the lock-in question. Give them the opportunity and chance. I think that's Diego there in the second row. Yes, Alex, if we can find.
Toss it.
There you go. Well caught.
No, just a reflection. We're talking moving the telco environment to the cloud. We should be aware that we're talking about at least 3 different things. I mean, when is moving the back office or the BSS or whatever, that at the end, a BSS, pardon me, but it's a CRM with some special characteristics. For sure, current public cloud providers are specialized on CRM and this kind of things because they have been doing this for some time, let's not say a long time. And then moving that probably is natural, the same way that, insurance companies or whoever is moving in that direction. This is one. Second is, for sure, email and all the like, we are using Azure for email, in Telefonica for a couple of years. And that's it. We are reasonably happy with it. No, personally, as I was a postmaster in the past, I would do things in a different way, but that's another story. The second is about all the control plane. Because at the end are basically, one way or another, they are internet servers. They are web services, they are radio servers, they are databases, etc. This is something that could be more or less suitable in some cases with the current cloud infrastructure. But then it comes to the real stuff, the network itself, the network functions. This is something that, frankly, we keep talking about the telcos moving to the cloud, because the cloud is perfect. And the telcos are, snowflakes in the other sense, that we melt very easily and we are weak, etc. Come on. Currently, the network infrastructure, the forwarding infrastructure, simply cannot be moved to anything like the current public cloud. And the question is, are cloud providers willing to change themselves or to evolve themselves to support this eventual move in the future?
Oh, great. Thank Diego from Telefonica. Some great thoughts there. Anyone want to pick up on this idea of, look, our infrastructure's fixed. It's about adapting processes to suit and best suit telcos. Any thoughts from our guests on that one? Anyone wants to take a go?
I'm going to put Martin on the spot with AFO. There you go.
Yeah, look, transport clearly isn't going to move to the cloud, although it has to be said that the hyperscalers all have very, very large transport networks and actually could act as an offload. It's not hard to imagine, looking forward a decade or so, that you've got operator A running their fixed line digital voice in AWS, operator B running their fixed line digital voice in Azure, and traffic being handed off between Azure and AWS without it ever. Now, obviously it touches the telco's network, right? Because the telco owns the access network. But all of the sort of, the upper layers of the application, the control plane, the processing of the media and stuff like that, can all happen in hyperscale cloud, and potentially could travel over hyperscale transport. Whether that happens or not is going to be we'll have a product offering, if you like, and we'll have to engineer it so it appeals to telcos. It'll then be their choice. Do we roll our own or do we just buy that as a service?
Right. But don't you think there's a hybridization that will happen? So, to take analytics, for example, if you take any of these large telco networks, they will tap in and duplicate traffic. They'll have a whole mirror network just to be able to sense and understand all the traffic that's going around the network. You're not going to take that massive, terabit, petabyte capacity and just dump it into a cloud. So hybridization suggests that there will be pieces that will live in the telco, in their facilities, that will reduce that amount of data, that will do that pre-processing before it then goes into the cloud. For anybody who's ever used Splunk as an example and then got the bill after that and seen that go up and up and up, you'll know exactly what I mean, right? You have to be able to cut down the amount of data. And so there's this really interesting, when those solutions come to market, how do they get distributed? So elements of IBM or Google or AWS will then end up, as we started to see already, in satellite deployments that are in the MEC locations or in other places, right? So we're thinking about shipping everything out. Well, actually, the cloud's coming into the network. And one of the interesting things I think that's going to play out in these MEC locations, it's going to be a fight for real estate. And we're already seeing that, say, in Equinix locations, where the price of that real estate is going up and up and up because of the hybridization of applications.
Something we may be picking up on our session after lunch. Now we think I've got time for a question from the back again. It's Neil.
Yeah, sorry. Lock-in's a made-up concept. If you believe in lock-in, you're mad. So there's probably about 4 or 5 account managers that serve me tell me if they think they're worried about lock-in. Lock-in's about belief and about you can do it. And I think we focus on this in an insane amount of time. And if you look at our cycles, we swap everything in the network 8 years. How are you locked in? We're never locked in. And I think we overemphasize this problem. And we've got a lot of work going on to disaggregate and lock ourselves in actually more complex ways with our own complexity. So I guess my question is if lock-in's such a scary dimension, why is the industry going crazy on disaggregation? Because in theory, your whole tooling, your whole process is your complexity level's going up by a factor of 10. How is that solving your lock-in problem if you believe that lock-in exists? Because I've never believed it, and I never will, because I can't afford to, really.
All right, thanks very much, Neil. Any quick responses to Neil before we move on?
Well, I think disaggregation is all about choice. And I think customers, or in human nature, we like to be able to choose different things and solve complex problems and break down traditional barriers of actually getting certain things done. So I think, complexity, when managed appropriately, gives you agility and the ability to have choice. And choice, in theory, also drives down overall cost. So when we were talking about O-RAN as an example, we see one of the major plays around O-RAN in particular is really around a cost play. Having choice there, having in certain markets, a third viable choice is key. And that sometimes is difficult to attain because you have to do a lot of the integration and work with others that you traditionally haven't worked with to be able to do that.
Thanks, Daryl. Do want to pick up the pace because we want to get a couple more talking points in, and we've only got about 10 minutes to go before lunch, and you're not going to like me if I eat into your lunch time. Ahmed, you mentioned earlier about Telco Cloud. So this is our next point I'd just like to raise. Maybe we could start by asking you, is there now, we talk so much about public cloud, is there a future for what we might term the Telco Cloud? Is it just not too difficult, too costly, too time-consuming? Coming back to the point about this dichotomy, let's just give the job to the hyperscalers.
Yes, great question. So what you are doing at Orange, but not only Orange, but also with other European CSPs and also Ericsson and Nokia, is try to build some European telco cloud based on open source and Kubernetes, let's say, to see how we can move forward. But at the end of the day, we don't know if, let's say, the telco cloud is more expensive than what other cloud, and what the telco cloud brings us, like CSP, some benefits or not. We need to test, to go on this solution and try to build and to propose several solutions to our customers. Let's say to not be only focused on one direction, but let's say to have large panel.
Thanks, Ahmed. Any more thoughts about Telco Cloud or whether Telco Cloud is consigned to history?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so look, we've been working in the NFV space, in my former role since, the whole thing kicked off. And, we've worked with operators who are now on their third or fourth generation of Telco Cloud. And they learn a lot each time. And, but they continue to learn that it is really hard to stand up and operate a really, really world-class cloud that's cost-effective to run and that enables them to keep up with stuff. And of course, the world keeps moving on. Just as they've got their heads around OpenStack and virtualizing on top of a hypervisor, now everybody wants cloud-native applications, and now they've got to learn Kubernetes. And then it's like, okay, well, now we can get rid of the hypervisor layer. So now it's Kubernetes on bare metal. So it's a constant struggle. It's the hamster in the wheel, getting absolutely nowhere, but putting in a heck of a lot of energy. Look, I completely agree with the points that Andrew's made repeatedly about it's a hybrid world. Of course, it's not just about moving stuff to the cloud. Telcos will continue to need cloud on premises. I think, the question is, can the hyperscalers help them with that? And the answer is yes, because we can bring economies of software development scale, if you like, to the stack that has to be on the telco premises, and just take a lot of the complexity off of the table.
That is interesting. Thanks very much, Martin, for that.
I'll just add to that. I watched Mark Rowan's head of network at Dish, did an investor day, I guess on May 10th. And it was really interesting because he talked about kind of the different stacks that telcos could be running, starting from, the traditional everything on-premise built by the telco, maintained by it, to virtualization, to private cloud, and then finally the evolution into public cloud. And he's starting, kind of in that last in between, where private cloud is and where fully public cloud. And he's probably the most out there, I think, in terms of running a network fully on AWS. He estimates it's 5 to 10 years between each of those transformations. And so I guess I would caution telcos, you don't have to go through it serially. You can hop, you can jump steps, and you kind of, you kind of want to go all the way to public cloud because that's probably where we're going to end up. Again, to Andrew's point, not everything is going to be there, but you're going to want to push as much as you can. And like I said before, stand on the shoulders of the cloud providers and leverage their investment and their software capability, right, to add literally engineering talent to your organization without having to hire the talent yourself.
Thank you, Daniel. Unless there's any other comments on the Telco Cloud, Andrew? Quick one.
I was just saying, just to pick on that, we haven't talked about the role of integrators in any of this. And I think for the solutions that come in this, we agreed, they're going to be in different clouds, they're going to be private clouds as well. There has to be integration between all these elements. And so I think there's a great role from all the large systems integrators in the world that will refocus on how do I bring cloud to edge to all of these different places and bring it together as a complete solution. So if we're disaggregating everything while we're doing this, it's going to be the job of the SIs to reaggregate, or we'll be back in the do-it-yourself model that I think we're trying to avoid here.
Great. Thanks, Andrew. That is the boilerplate question of all our TelecomTV summits, by the way. What's the role of the systems integrator in insert X here? We'll find out one day. Right, we've got another talking point we'd like to get to, and that is all about cloud-native cultures and mindsets. Is it better for telcos to actually focus on fostering and developing a cloud-native mindset, getting the skill-based necessary skills? I mean, we were talking about this 3 years ago and every year since. Creating the necessary knowledge to work alongside the cloud companies, create new services. Should we be more focused as telcos, perhaps than CSPs and DSPs, on getting that cloud-native mindset, getting and developing that cloud-native culture? Any takers? Amol.
So, of course, this is sort of a rhetorical stroke loaded question, right? So the answer has to be yes from a hyperscaler's perspective. I do think there is a greenfield versus brownfield scenario that you need to think through. As an end state, yes, but if you are, let's say, a cloud-native telco that has just started out building, then of course it's going to be a lot easier to say, okay, we can now build this. But you have X thousand employees already as a workforce. You cannot really realistically expect those to become cloud-native SREs overnight. And that is a huge opportunity cost and burden that you would have to bear. So I think there would have to be some amount of skills development done over time, because obviously you're going to move towards some form of cloud workloads and some form of cloud operations. But I think it is going to be a journey. And here, again, back to the boilerplate, integrators can help because they do have huge amounts of people trained up on these kind of skills that can then bridge that journey from the brownfield to the greenfield. But I think that's how we probably look at it.
Yeah, and it's totally important. Any more thoughts about developing this mindset, Martin?
Yeah. I mean, look, my experience is that actually most large telcos are pretty knowledgeable now about what cloud native is and what it means. They don't have to become massively skilled in the art. What they ought to do, and what we do see them doing, is understanding it well enough to put the right questions to their vendors. And ultimately, it's the vendors that have to master cloud native as it relates to building network functions, which will be easier to deploy, easier to operate, easier to configure, more portable between different cloud types, and so on. It's the vendors who are dragging their feet, right? And that's partly because it's just a lot of work to take an existing application that's working perfectly well in a virtualized environment and make it cloud native.
Now, we do get a lot of questions from our audience about cloud native and skills and retraining and getting new skills and where we get these skills from. And you know, we've had a lot of questions in already today about skills. In fact, we've had a lot of questions on a lot of different topics here. Some of the topics we haven't even covered yet, so the questions are coming in. We will get to them this afternoon. We will get to them tomorrow at the appropriate time. We'll get to as many of them as we can. So I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank our online audience for sending in all these questions and comments. We do read them and read them all. More thoughts about the work skills and cultures? Danielle, then we'll go to Daryl.
I'll jump in. So yeah, I think, again, I've spent about 10 years in HR. And when you're changing culture, which I think is a big part of moving to the public cloud, changing the culture within the telco, the best way to get your people to actually start to learn new skills is to immerse them. It's almost like a language, right? Like when you're trying to learn a new language, the best way to learn it is to go to that country and just start speaking it. And so they need to go to the cloud country, right, cloud city, and they need to start speaking cloud. And so that's the best way to, right, I mean, there's certifications, Google, Azure, and AWS, a lot of free training is out there. The certifications are relatively cheap. The best way to learn is to absolutely immerse them. But in your opening address, Guy, in terms of, you know, moving from a telco to a techco, right, I'm gonna caution telcos to understand what you're up against in terms of compensation. Right? The way that tech companies compensate their employees is usually with it, and Amol probably knows this, and Azure probably knows this at Microsoft, it's a big stock component, and that stock has significant growth assumed. And so telcos are going to have to rethink their compensation that attracts top talent, cloud talent, when you're going up against an opportunity to work at a Google or AWS or Azure. And that's going to be really tough. And so it's everything from compensation, culture change, change management, changing the work, and actual just straight up HR skills development that we're talking about. I mean, again, this is a major transformation.
Great, yes, and I think that's a topic we could add to our Cloud Native Telco Summit, which is in the second half of the year, and I think we're probably approaching our 4th edition of that, so we'll put that into the debate for later in the year to explore further. But Darren.
No, I would agree with everything you said there. I think it is a transformation. I think you've got to, you know, literally the saying, you drink your own champagne or eat your own dog food, whatever you want to use it. You've really got to get into doing that. I would also offer advice that there are companies like mine in Red Hat, IBM, Google, Microsoft. We have innovation centers. You should be leveraging more of those because that's a way of immersing yourself in terms of all of the cloud native development that is occurring. So I'd really recommend leverage your vendors to be able to do that. We're very keen to actually facilitate that for you because it's to our advantage. The more people that we have educated around cloud native, the easier it is for us to position the technology and help solve some of the other problems. So I think you could actually get a lot further, a lot faster if you were to actually try and leverage that whole ecosystem of vendors using this technology. And there is a skills gap. I mean, you know, a number of operators I talk to will say, well, to hire someone who understands something about Kubernetes, I have to pay them 3 times more than the people I already have. And that comes to your point. And then I've got a problem of they've worked on a project for 6 months and all of a sudden Google shows up and takes them, pays them twice. I think Microsoft just announced the other day you're paying people 2x more just to retain people and hire new people into the business. So there's a real cost to retaining and gaining those skills. So it is a real transformation.
Yeah, a very, very important point. There's another point that's just come up from one of our audience members, and I think we've just got time to squeeze this in. Ahmed, perhaps I could ask you this one. We're talking about new skills and learning, you know, the cloud native skills. But what about the traditional network engineering skills? So, is there still demand for the traditional network engineering skills?
Yes, for me, let's say the network skills is still something that we are looking for also, because as you know, it's not if you are moving all application or 5G core or whatever we want on the public cloud, that means, okay, we don't need any networking skills because we still have networking skills. So, but the positive thing is we are keeping the networking skills, but we need to increase also other skills like CI/CD, DevOps, and so on. But for our perspective, networking skills is still demanding, and we're still keeping these skills.
Good to hear. Very good to hear. Any quick comments about the skills?
Well, I was going to say that's an and, because if you think about the network skills, in the old days like last week, when you had a network problem, you went and you manually manipulated a router or a switch or whatever it was and fixed it. Now you expect those people to write scripts or go into a tool, and even to the point where I think we're trying to get to the point where you ban access to the command line, right? A network engineer who's been brought up all their lives using a command line is now no longer allowed to touch it, and they have to use an API and write a script to go solve that and make it repeatable. So we're asking a lot of our people in stepping up those skills and kind of merging all of these things into one place. So it's a hard thing. And for IBM, as we hire people who have networking skills, who understand CI/CD process, who don't need to code but write scripts, there's not that many of them. And so we need to do a better job with universities, with just bringing up people, and that's the only way this gets resolved.
Great. Well, watch the video we're going to be playing just after lunch on that note. I'll say no more for the time being. Thank you very much, everyone, because lunch is about to start. So I'd like to thank all our guests. But before we end the session, we ought to go and have a look at our poll, because people have been voting online and in the room. We've been running this session-specific poll for a couple of days now, I think. And here are the results so far, because we asked, which areas do telcos absolutely require help from the public cloud providers? And a quick scan down there. Oh, there's no clear leader there, but scaling and distributing workloads and learning and implementing cloud-native processes. High, look at that. There's still a skills need and an understanding need there. I'm sure that will develop over the course of a day and a half, so we shall look back at that at a later point. We do need to leave it there, though. Lunch will be served shortly, and I believe lunch is in the foyer outside. Just follow the TelecomTV team when the doors open. And any other questions for this session, I'm sure you can pick up in the networking break. We are not rushing you. Don't forget the charity pinball with Neil at the back. We'll be running the machines all lunch, so please, please, please dig deep. It's a good cause, and let's see if we can get some changes at the top of that leaderboard. We will see you back here at 20 minutes past 2. 20 minutes past 2. Ray is going to be taking over and looking at 5G and the edge. He's going to take 5G right to the edge, right up to the edge. No further, but right up. So please, big hand for all our guests, and we'll see you at the end.